me. Yeah, we are live. Today we're going to talk. Excuse me. Got too excited. Today we are going to talk about, as you can see from the photo here, we have a dual quad set up on an LS, and not just any LS. It's actually a fairly impressive one. It was a 383 stroker that I built, and it had lots of good stuff on it. So it made fairly good power. I'll be showing you that in just a second. We'll talk about the power output. But what I did was on this 383, which we built with a 4-inch stroker crank and an LS1 block. I think this might have been an LS6 block. Let's see here. No, this was a 5.3 block. I take that back. So it was a 5.3 block, and then we bored it out to 3905, and then we put a 4-inch stroker in it. We put a flat top piston in it. We had very good cylinder heads on this. We had Trick Flow 215 heads on it, the CNC ported Gen X heads. Had a pretty good sized camshaft in it. This was back when we did the comp 459 cam, so that was a 617, 624 lift. 231, 239, and a 113 LSA. So pretty good sized camshaft. We had valve reliefs in these pistons. We didn't really have to worry about piston to valve clearance, but that cam will still fit with stock stuff too. But a pretty good sized cam. This was run 1 3/4 headers, probably the QTPs that we had way back then. And then what I did was we did a comparison running the dual quad stuff, the dual quad setup, compared that to an Edelbrock Victor Jr. intake manifold, because that's the other carbureted manifold intake manifold that we had on there. And oddly enough, and I'll show you the power curves. Oddly enough, they both made very, very similar peak power numbers. So the question is, which one of these would you pick? And then the reasoning for picking these is, obviously varied. If we take a look at the power output, first we'll take a look at some of these things. So this is Troy at West Tech pretending to bolt these on. It was already bolted on. We just do these for the lead photos. But you can see it has the HOLLEY dual quad, and this dual quad manifold is also set up. I don't know if this one did not have the injectors in it because they offered it both ways. It's the same manifold, but you can also run a different lid on there and run, if you wanted to run carburetors on top of that, again, you could do that. If you wanted to run fuel injection on it, you could do all that. The intake manifold, fairly versatile. We ran I think that these are two 4160 carburetors, if I remember right. And the reason for that is because the proximity of the carburetors to each other, I don't think that we could fit two 4150 style with both the full-size bowls on them. So the 4160s are what we put on there. You can see these head chokes on them. It's more than enough carburation for them. I think that these were 600s or 650s or something. They didn't need to be very big, because let's face it, I mean, if it's even at 600, if it's 1200 CFM, that's more than enough for what we're doing, even though this was a pretty good 383. And so, but what we did, here's the manifold. Now you can see it doesn't have the fuel injection provisions on it, but it has 2 pads for carburetors. These were our carburetors. And then controlling the ignition, we had our typical MSD ignition controller on there. Just plugs right into all the factory stuff, so we could adjust the timing all we want, and then we would adjust the fuel with the carburetors by changing the jetting or adding a jet plate if we needed to do that on the dual quad stuff. Luckily, we didn't have that problem. We also ran on this motor during testing. We ran the Edelbrock Victor Jr. intake manifold, and this was a 750 HOLLEY HP version, which this one way back then had been subjected to the Percy's external dial-a-jet setup, and so it just made it easy to dial in the air fuel. It's basically a way to change the jetting externally, which is very, very quick and very, very easy, and made it nice for doing the testing. So it made it, it made the tuning part of it a lot faster rather than having to constantly pull the bowls off. And then we run each one of them on the dyno. You can see we got small, I think it's probably 3-inch open mufflers. These are either Bassani's or MagnaFlows extensions, basically off of the header, so a collector extension. And then we also ran the dual quad setup on the dyno, same headers and all that stuff. We had an ATI damper on it. We had the Mazir electric water pump like we normally do. And you can see that this has an oil drain for a turbo setup, because we had also run this 383 with a turbo. But here are the dyno results. Here are the dyno results, and you can see, like I said, they made the same peak power. In fact, they made really almost identical power from 5100 on up. Peak numbers were 525 and 526 horsepower at 62, between 6,000 and 6,200 RPM, still making power out at 6,500, 490 foot-pounds for the dual quad, and 484 foot-pounds for the single plane. But you look at those and go, well, that's not a very, there's almost no difference basically in the peak horsepower. There's a little bit of difference in the peak torque, but the curves tell a dramatically different story about what you might want to use, about which one of these you might want to use, because one of them offers a great deal more. And the dual quad is, because it's essentially a dual plane manifold, the dual quad offers a lot more power. And a lot of guys, I can remember doing this story way back for the guys at Super Chevy and getting a lot of people commenting on this. And this is common when people comment on dual quad stuff. They're like, oh yeah, but that one has way more carburation, that's why it did better. I'm like, no, if that was the case, if it was a carburation issue and we needed more flow, we would see the gains at the top of the RPM range. We wouldn't see them at the bottom. If it wanted to gain more power, and we did that through airflow going into the motor, into the manifold, and then into the motor, we would see that on the top. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing what we're seeing here is the dual quad did way better everywhere in the curve, and then was as good as the single plane was at essentially, in this case, what would be the top of the RPM range for 6,000, 6,500 RPM. So you can see the torque difference down at, let's say, 3,000. It wasn't metering very well with the single plane there, but it could be 40 or 50 foot-pounds of torque. So it's quite a bit. I mean, it's a big difference. And if you got the dual quad set up and you got the metering just right for that with jet plates or however you would wanted to do that, and you got that just perfect, the dual quad stuff would work very well, because and on these you would open the primary circuits on both of these first and then open the secondary setups. So you could do it that way, or you could have all four of them open up the same. That's how we did it when we ran this setup with a dual 4-hole throttle bodies, dual 4150 throttle bodies. Those fit easily because you don't have to worry about fuel bowls on them, and so they're not nearly as long as the carburetor setup is. But we tested this manifold in a bunch of different ways. We ran it the way you're seeing it here, with basically two carburetors on it. We ran it, like this. When we ran it fuel injected, we ran it with two carburetors on, or two 4150s on it when we ran it fuel injected. And then it also has another part that bolts onto here that then accepts all of the lids from HOLLEY. So you could run the single lid with a single throttle opening, either a 102 or 105 or a 90, 92. You could run a dual quad setup on top of that again and do it that way. Putting that second piece on does extend the carburetor pad. It's not really extending the runner length, but you would have some change there. You could obviously run carburetor spacers on this too. I don't think that we did that when we ran these, because it wasn't necessary. Sometimes it's necessary for throttle linkage, because the throttles don't want to activate because they hit stuff. That wasn't the problem with this manifold, but you can see I actually on this, on dual quad stuff and multiple carburetor intake manifolds, traditionally for the small block Fords and Chevys and stuff, they don't normally do as well as a modern version, like let's say an RPM air gap style, a modern version of a single carbureted deal. And a single carburetor deal it's easier to tune and stuff. And so when you get into multiple carburetors, looks very cool, and that might be a reason that you guys would pick this, because it does look awesome. But also in this case, the looks are better than that. Now, I would need to look and see. We didn't compare this to a dual plane, like a Performer RPM version of this, or Holley has a dual plane. There are a couple of dual planes available for this. I didn't compare it to that. The dual plane would do much better down low than the single plane does, but might miss out a little bit at the top. So the dual quad might inch ahead of a standard dual plane, but it wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be enough of a gain, I don't think, to maybe justify having the cost of 2 carburetors on there. But again, if you like that, and you could put a cool dual, an oval dual quad air cleaner assembly on there, all of that would be good. So let me know in the comments. Let me know what you guys think about the dual quad setup. Would you go the dual quad route, or would you just try to stay with a single carburetor? And you'll notice that, from the, I'll show you the power curve again. We notice from the power curve, that's pretty good power. It's getting up near 500 foot-pounds of torque, and it's over 500 horsepower at 525. So that's a pretty good, little performance motor, and it's plenty torquey, especially with the dual quad dual plane setup. So it's, it was a good combination. It was one of the few times where I've run multiple carburetor manifolds and had them work well. The other time I've done that is when we ran dual carburetors on a high ram, and that worked out very well as well. Dual 4-hole throttle bodies works well, but the carburetors work even better because we got charge cooling from that. So it did well. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Are you guys, would you want put a question up here? Would you opt for the dual quads on a CARB LS? That's my question. Knowledge, Lunchbox, what's going on? Jason, Jet, ATV. Let's learn. I came here to learn. The other thing that I'm doing, in fact, Jimmy and I are both doing this, and you guys are welcome to join us if you would like. We're doing fasting. So we're doing 24-hour fasts because I want to lose weight, because I'm not in the shape that I want to be in, and haven't been since probably before COVID. So I've been running and stuff, and I want to get back into shape again and better than I am now, and also want to lose weight. So we're doing 24-hour fasts, which means I'm eating one time once a day. And I've scheduled it so that my 24-hour fast, so let me know if anybody's interested in joining us. We'll give you some words of advice and stuff, and stick to itness. I'm eating during kind of the middle of the day, because when you're sleeping, you don't worry about, you're not hungry, and it's fine. So, and then you have a little bit of time, from after the time that you wake up through breakfast, and then if you get to lunch, or a little bit past lunch, and then you only have to worry about from lunch until when you go to bed. And quite honestly, after you do it for a while, I'm not there yet, but after you do it for a while, you don't have these cravings. For me, my big thing has always been sugar, and that's terrible for you. But I do like my coffee ice cream and stuff. And particularly it's hard I'm sure for a lot of people, certainly for me, but harder during the winter, because we like to get together, the family gets together, and we'll, put the fire on and curl up with the dogs, and then we'll binge watch something that we're watching, like Ted Lasso, which was amazing, but things like that. But you sit there and snack all night, and that's terrible for you, because then you go to bed and you've snacked all night, you don't sleep well, you end up gaining weight and stuff. So we're trying to do that, and then after you fasted, you then have to make good food choices, because after you fast, and then you're hungry and you're like, okay, now I want to eat something. It can't be, oh, I'm gonna have 12 pizzas now and some Krispy Kremes or whatever. You don't want to do that. So we're doing that. So that's something new. Both Jimmy and I are doing it, so we can talk to each other and go, dude, don't eat like 15 cookies. That's not good. Class has started. Please hit the button. Heck yeah, all these things 383 might be my future. The dual quads. It is a cool thing. It is cool looking, and I'm hoping that somebody has some really cool dual quad with that spacing. I'm hoping that somebody has really cool like air cleaner assemblies that can work on this. I have been, when I go running, I see lizards all the time. I have been looking for snakes, and so I go out and look around for stuff. Dual carbs are cool, but who wants to clean and tune 2 carbs? Higher PM Big Bang NA shootout, stock bottom end, LS versus a Coyote. I don't know what you mean by a big bang. There's no big bang for an NA motor because it can't make enough power to hurt itself. Better choke shroud on the 750. Good to see you. Getaway, what's going on? I'm surprised that the dual quad made so much torque with the short runners. Tunnel rams always seem to make better torque. Yeah, tunnel rams are good. This is not really that. This is more like a dual quad, dual plane manifold. 3,600 torque curve is awesome. Should compare this dual quad to a tunnel ram. I have, Dan, this manifold does not make as much power as a high ram does. A high ram is quite a bit better on top. Just for FYI or for sale, you mean is the dual quad for sale? Is that what you're asking? I don't have, the motor's not for sale, definitely. Perfect manifold for a dual stage 500 shot. Yeah, that's the nice thing. That is the other nice thing about dual quad stuff. And we have done that before. We ran like 250 shots on, we did it on the big block though. We did it on a big block. It was making a lot of power. So that's certainly something that can be done. And we did that on a dual high ram, dual carb high ram deal. I did that with the ill-fated Big Bang 5.3 nitrous motor and was a disaster. Forensic teardown coming this weekend for what? What are you tearing down, Stang? Only reason I want multiple carburetors is on a blower setup that just needs more fuel. And you could argue on a blower setup, if you have dual quads on a traditional 671 or 871, that kind of thing, I think you probably get better distribution too that way. Those power curves kind of remind me of the log versus the header turbo exhaust manifold. Without like having issues of a single that could feed the engine at wide open throttle, but not as good for part throttle. I think you're missing the 671 between the dual carbs and the intake manifold. That would do better than this manifold would if you had the spinny manifold in between there. Dual quads for adapters for the 2 and the wall sound. Yeah, it's good. You could put, with adapters, you could do Q-jets on them. Yeah. Would you opt for the dual carbs on a carburetor LS? I don't think I'd go dual quad in 2015. We have great carbs and intake manifolds to choose from without the extra cost and maintenance. There's not great carbureted manifolds for cathedral port LS motors, unfortunately. There might be some race stuff, but not like the dual planes that are out there are not as good as a, like there's nothing that's the fast equivalent kind of thing. I was shocked how much more torque the tunnel rams make. Did you run a phenolic spacer on each setup? If so, how big and how much difference would you expect to see with or without one? If you're asking if we ran carb spacers, we did not. I just recently put it, and this is, again, this is not a tunnel ram. I just recently put a tunnel ram back on my Roadster. Better response, better acceleration over an 800 double pumper Holley on a Super Victor Junior. What is a Super Victor Junior? I've never heard of that. I've heard of a Super Victor, and then I've heard of a Victor Junior, but I haven't heard of a Super Victor Junior on a 337 small block. Honestly, I'd stick with fuel injection. No, I get it. I get that. One carb is good. Dual carbs is gooder. That's right. It's much more gooder. This has dual carby goodness. And you think it's possible to 3D print some LS intake manifolds out of plastic? There is some strong plastic. Yeah, the strength I'm not worried about. If you could get it to, and I have one. I have a 3D printed manifold that I've never tested. It's an EFI manifold. The heat, the temperature thing is what needs to be taken into account. I'm in no shape to work out. Look into vitamins during your fast and forever. No, we are taking vitamins. I'm thinking about trying. I've been watching, naturally, I go do a lot of research on everything, but I'm looking at the methylated vitamins. So Jimmy and I might try that. We'll be talking about some of that stuff. I've been doing fasting the last year and a half. I ate 2 meals a day with only having eggs for breakfast. I lost 50 pounds and never felt better, more energetic, more healthy. Cut out the sugar. Yeah, it is important to do that. And I make a lot of, when I, like these last couple of days, I'd go to the store and get steaks, and I just barbecue steaks, and then I have those. Sometimes I'll have steak by itself, sometimes as sliders on Hawaiian bread. And I know Hawaiian bread's probably not good, but it's really good. Easier on the adult beverages. Yeah, I don't drink a lot, and I don't ever drink beers. If I drink, it's usually some vodka or whiskey based thing, and that's usually when Lisa and I go out for date night. So it's one of those, maybe sometimes two, but almost always one. Dual carbs for a 500 shot. I was at a stoplight, and a homeless guy showed up and said, "I haven't eaten in 3 days." I said, "I wish I had your willpower," and sped up. You can go a long time without food. Can't go a long time without water, though. Done a water only fast for 3 days. From that experience, all I'll say is you really need to control your intake when you do eat. 3 days is a lot. Always happy to be here. My favorite place on YouTube. Getaway. You're always welcome here, man. Big bang by RPM horsepower limit. There's no amount of horsepower that you could make NA that would be that would cause destruction to any of the parts. You could theoretically over rev it, and especially if you went past whatever the springs and things would make. We have done 8,000 RPM stuff on. I don't think I've done that on a stock bottom end. We've gotten to almost 8,000 on stock bottom end stuff. I don't know that you'd have a problem with the stock bottom end on that. I think it would go to 8,000. I only eat once a day, around 4:30 every day. I've done this for a long time. That's good. See which will turn the most RPM, the most runs on the dyno. You're going to compare a double overhead cam 4-valve motor to a cam and block 2-valve motor for RPM. I think that's probably a little one-sided. What would roughly be the lowest RPM turn to dual quad before it would make more sense to run one? I don't think that you have a problem with too much carburetor at low RPM. You just have to make sure that you have enough signal to do that. If you wanted to do it, you could also run these things on just the primary circuit. And so you're only running essentially a 4-barrel, 2 barrels from each carburetor. There are some filaments that are high heat and strong that can be used for intake manifold. You're going to need a good printer to be able to print the higher heat filament. Viper, what's going on? Appreciated. Use that for frosty cold beverages later. Super Victor and Team G manifolds were the hot item back in my carburetor days. For big block Chevys, are you talking about, Thomas? Determining verifying point of failure of my LS1. Let's go. Let go after 200 miles. Thinking OEM rod bolt. Let go. Got to see what I can salvage. It would be odd that that the rod bolt let go unless it was overstretched or not tightened or something. Because you got motors with 300,000 or 400,000 miles on them with stock rod bolts, so it's not a failure of like strength or anything. Eat eggs for breakfast, which has a ton of vitamins. I only have carbs with dinner, and I have coffee to hold me over till lunch. Pick one night a week and go out and have some drinks. Will you consider revisiting the Buick 3800 for compound turbo setup? One turbo feeding the compressor of another smaller. No, I won't do a compound turbo on the 3800 because it's not necessary. We can get all of the power that we want out of a 3800 V6 with just one turbo. We can go, if the motor would take it, we could go way over 1,000 horsepower with one of our single G42 turbos. So there's more than enough turbo there to blow up a stock bottom end 3800. I used to live on steak, eggs, and protein shakes while training. Yep, all that stuff's good for you. Team Recport checking in. Yeah, it's going to be hard to run a Recport head on a 383, but tank engine Big Bang. And it's a fifth of vodka for me. It's usually gone in 2 days. A fifth? That's a lot for 2 days. We are talking about this. We're talking about dual quad versus a single Victor Jr. Super Victor. Okay, yeah, Rich, there we go. Yeah, a Super Victor is a good motor. It's a good manifold. I rarely admit I may have somehow screwed up the install, even with the torque wrench. Yeah, and on a rod bolt, you shouldn't be using a torque wrench. Not if it's a factory rod. Any engines take way more stress on the rod due to RPM than cylinder pressure. Yes, but not at the same RPM, those two things. I know that the turbo guys are saying, well, there's pressure holding the piston at TDC, and there is something to be said for that. But there's not always pressure there when the thing is spinning. There's only compression on one of the cycles. So if you're spinning at an RPM with the turbo, it's not always like that. And also, how much of it does it alleviate? Does it make it 2% better, 10% better? Like, is it absorbing that amount of it? But I agree, snatch loads are not good for stuff. And if you could run a 6,500 RPM turbo motor, it's way better than running a 7,500 or 8,500 RPM NA motor. Super Victor Senior, there you go. Super Victor and Team G run small blocks. Yeah, I need to go back and look. I think the guys at Westech tested some of that stuff. I didn't think that the Team G was really a player compared to a Super Victor. We 3D printed a custom intake for a nitromethane small block with PA12 heat resistant, and it did not melt in the fuel. Okay. That's why I try not to do it, but about once a month. Okay. I readily admit I may have screwed up the install. Had an angle torque. Okay. Yeah, we get it, Dan. What mufflers are you running on that? They look different from your normal mufflers. What do you prefer to run? It doesn't matter what. Most of the time, honestly, I would run the setups with just a collector extension on the header. I started when I insisted that we do V-bands on everything, that I have an extension with mufflers on it, and I like running that. But the problem is you extend the length of pipe with the muffler on it, then you're levering the header, which is not good. And so we put stands on it, and that works good. So you secure it to the stand, like it's just a jack stand, basically. The mufflers that we run a lot are MagnaFlow. We've got some straight through 3-inch stuff. Those, like I said, I remember those as being Bassani ones, but anything that will attach to it just to bring some of the noise down is good. When I worked at Probe, CHP, Sean built the 283 small block that turned 9,000 and went 9s in a box Nova with a lot of nitrous. Okay. That's cool. I like Sean. I miss Sean. I haven't talked to him in a long time. I did a lot of stuff with CHP. Dual blow through quads would be cool to see. Yeah, that would be maybe a little problematic, but it would be cool. Finally saw some details on the smoking unit, hot vapor engine, essentially a turbo with a 90 degree fuel and 230 degree air, 21 air fuel. Who's copying me on the emoji? Is somebody using your emo? Good to know about the 3800. I'm in the younger 4-cylinder days. Compound turbos were the dream. Now it's a 3800 Turbo Ranger. Yeah. And even with the 4-cylinder, you could make, you guys are making more than 1,000 horsepower with single turbo Honda stuff, B series and K series stuff. It's not hard. You just got to get the naturally aspirated motor making decent power. Know anything about an electric condenser for noise suppression for in the tank fuel pump? I have not heard of that. An in the tank fuel pump should not be very noisy. It should be isolated and it should be submerged most of its life. So it should not be very loud. An external one is much louder. On overhead cam engines, do you ever reuse chain guides that have grooves worn in? I'm putting an engine back together tonight and guide is unavailable within 50 miles. Yes, all the time. I'm the king of reuse for junkyard stuff. So 462 valves, 464 valves. I don't know that I would do that if I was putting the motor in something permanently, but to get it running, I would definitely do that. I understand the rec ports on 383. I love just represent Team Rec Port. That's all good. I have lots of rec port stuff tested. Those are good heads. In fact, I tell people a lot of times, to the dismay of cathedral port guys, that factory rec port heads are better than any factory cathedral port head. Yes, more than a 243, a 799, a 706, 241, 317. If any of the factory rec port heads are way better, they just flow, 50 or more CFM more than the cathedral port stuff does, so they make more power. God boost, thank you very much. Nathan's Hunt, what's going on? Nathan Hunt. Okay, Hunt's old school. Guys have grooves worn in. I'm using a new chain. Twin turbo blow through on turbo feeding on CARB would be wild. Yeah, twin turbos, and then you could do it. You could do it one of two ways, and I've seen it both. So you could do an individual bonnet like the one that we use from CS Racing on a blow through carburetor. You could use one of those each from the turbo, or you could do a common custom like oval carb bonnet with two outlets with the two turbos feeding those. And you could do that as well. Shane, what's going on? 544 valve navigator engine handles 6 psi without gapping rings usually. I wouldn't be afraid to do that on the engine dyno. I don't ever remember checking a 544 valve for gap, but I don't think 6 psi would be a problem. It just depends on for how long, how much temperature you put in it. My Walbro 255 in the tank pump has a loud whine. Maybe it just has to do with my weak battery voltage. Yes, the pump could be getting bad too. I've got a broken BTR 660 valve spring. I was running 85. All the springs have started rusting, less than a year old. Anyone have this issue? Should I remove valve covers for storage or air out? I would look and see if you have water getting in there from the cracked head, coming up through the head studs. Did you have a crack? You can crack a block and then the water can travel up the head stud. Bad head gasket, possibly, that you're getting water in there, because there shouldn't be condensation in there. I mean, you're running E85, but the E85 shouldn't get into the breather unless you have breathers where you're drawing that in. I believe that CPR is the old equipment and designs from CHP. The guy who owned CPR used to be in sales at CHP back in the day. CPR is big on LS stuff and is still local. Oh, okay. It would be smart of them to be in the LS market because that's bigger than all of the other ones that they did. Getting ready for the next test and tune. What happened to the Camaro, Nathan? The first run wasn't bad for turn down. Drill a 2-4 manifold for each port, water meth injection. They already have one set up to run fuel injection, so you could put them in that too. TFS has a spring upgrade kit for Ford cast iron heads. There are single springs or any double springs available or overkill. I don't know. I don't know what spring upgrade you're talking about. And so I don't know anything about the spring rates or the available lift before coil bind on that kit. Do you think a 345 gear ratio is a good pair for tip? That's probably TPI, I would imagine, and a 700 R4. Then yes, because they had a 342 available from the factory. Shane, if that's for me, I'm in California. If you have ported heads, there could be water coming from the top cylinder bolts if you didn't put the proper amount of thread sealant. Why would water come from the top bolts? On the log, it looks like if it broke in first gear, it was still around 146, but it was 130 at the 8th. Roy, what's going on? So we'll take a look at some more of these photos. Dual quad motor does have ARP head studs on it, as God nature intended. That sounds like one of my doggies, huh? It does. That's Brady, huh? What are you doing? What are you doing, huh? What are you doing? What are you doing? Your tongue's hanging out. Were you running? Huh? Were you running? What were you doing? What were you doing? What do you see up there? What's up there? Oh, there's a bug. There's a bug up there, huh? You can't go get the bug. You cannot go get the bug. He's fine. He's not bothering anybody. He's okay. He's good. He's one of my buddies. You don't need to go get the bug. Go. Go get your brother. Go. See, he sees I call them mosquito eaters. I think technically they don't actually do that, but they're the big ones. They're bigger than regular mosquitoes. And so he's just hanging out up there, but he saw them and he's like, I definitely have to eat those. They do that at the windows. E85 and other alcohol fuels contaminate the engine oil and attract moisture. Steve Morris has a couple of videos on it. He removes the valve covers when his car's in storage between races. Okay, yeah, I didn't realize. I forgot about the contamination part. That definitely is a thing. When we drain the oil out of the E85 stuff, which is almost exclusively what I run when I'm running turbo stuff on the dyno, turbo or blower stuff. The oil is definitely contaminated on these, particularly on these junkyard motors. You port stock heads, but the springs should not rust. If you port the stock heads, they will sometimes go up into the area where the smaller head bolts go into and cause water to go through the bolts. Are you talking about the tiny bolts that are at the very top of the head? I've never seen that. Or are you talking about the top row of bolts under the valve cover? Because we've seen, not from porting, but I've seen a couple of things. One, I've seen, like I said, if you break a hole into the block, or I've also seen where when you tighten the head stud down, it actually breaks the head right underneath where the head bolt or head stud is. And so we've had that break, because when they spot face that, if they go too deep on that, you can go into water. And so we've seen water trickle out of there, but that's not, you'd have to do that, under the valve cover to do it. We do get a lot of E85 in the oil between races. We always change the oil after each drive. Yeah, that's a good idea. I do that on the big flying bug is called a crane fly. Okay. Would dual Edelbrock VRS 850 carbs be too much for my 6-liter manual trans? What intake manifold are you going to run on it? And since an 850 will feed a lot of motor, a single 850 would easily feed beyond this, would feed 600 plus horsepower. It's more than you would need, and you wouldn't be able to fit those on this manifold anyways. They told me to put the thread sealant on my smaller head bolts when I had my heads ported for this reason. I don't know if it applies to all ported heads. Okay. In one of your tests, you showed how a log manifold showed faster spool than a turbo manifold. Yeah, tubular one. Same engine. Is that simply due to the shorter path to the turbo? It's probably has more to do with the smaller size of the passage that the exhaust is flowing through. That's why I didn't use methanol in my go-kart 5 horsepower Briggs. I did change oil after a few hours. The oil looked like a milkshake and always wore my rod bearings. Yeah, it is hard on stuff. This is the most civilized channel. Well, we want that. We don't want, there's no reason for people to come and get all irate. In fact, I've kicked a lot of people off of the channel for that exactly thing. I've gotten a lot of people commenting, and then they go on the Instagram and Facebook and stuff and comment, oh, he can't take somebody disagreeing with him. I'm like, no, I can. I can 100% take that. But I can't take it when people do it rudely. You're not listening to everybody else here, including myself, that's telling you, look, you don't know what you're talking about. And even if you pointed something out where I had made a mistake, it's okay, but there's a way to do that. And being all irate about it is not the way to go. I've got stock LS3 heads, no porting. We make power using all the boost. Yeah, that works. How many HP are the engines making? Our 408 is upwards of 1500. On a HOLLEY high ram LS3 ports. Yeah, I wouldn't. We've run twin 950s on it before. So twin 850s would be fine. Twin 750s is probably more than enough. But yeah, dude, go to 850s, man. It's not going to hurt anything. You just got to tune it right. Six PSI, stock bottom end 302, 93 octane, gap rings, daily driver. What concerns for longevity, timing? I don't have any concerns for longevity for that. I ran 85,000 miles with my stock 302. Well, it wasn't stock. It had heads and a cam and an intake on it on my 5-liter Mustang with a Vortec on it. We ran more than 6 pounds. And so if you put ring gap in it and you tune it correctly, that will last forever. Someone needs to boost the HOLLEY Skyram. It won't allow you to do that. It'll come apart. Let me recommend a religion for you. That's the thing. And I think everybody here, it seems like agrees with that sentiment that I've had this conversation with people about religion, about politics. I said, look, you're not going to find anybody that is a bigger believer of freedom of religion or supports that more than me. I said, you'd be really hard pressed to find somebody that would stand with you and fight for whatever weirdness you believe, because we live in a country where you get to do that. But while you get to pick yours, your political party, your religion, you don't get to pick mine. And so as long as we're okay with that, I'm not going to pick yours. I'm not going to try to steer you into doing something else or whatever. I may have a conversation with you and give you information, but I'm not going to try to steer you into something else other than what you want. But I expect the same thing. If Richard can't handle the competition, he wouldn't be a racer. Yeah. And I wouldn't be on social media doing YouTube or Instagram and Facebook if I couldn't handle negative comments, because that's what 90% of it is. Not that everybody says bad things. It's just that all of the people that would say good things don't say anything. They're just like, oh yeah, this is cool. Some people say good things, but the people that you get more prominently are the people that want to complain about something or tell you how you did something wrong or how they're so much smarter, whatever. And you know the max power on a 99 Silverado fuel pump for an NA pump gas? I don't know what the flow rate is of the stock pump. Does anybody know? Richard, love your stuff. I'm an LR4, 4.8 liter, nice, and a manual truck. Oh, it is a manual trans truck? That's cool. I'm trying to decide on a cam. It's got PRC heads. I'm going to run a single 64 precision for low, mid towing power. I would pick a small cam. You could do it with a stock cam, let the turbo do all the work. I don't know if you're going to be sporting it around or if you want something that has like chop in it. So it sounds like it has a cam. But our low buck truck camshaft will be good for that because it adds low speed power, but it's not going to add low speed power on a 4.8 and until a higher engine speed than it otherwise would on a 5.3 or a 6.0. So you, like I said, you could do that with a stock one. You could get something smaller than maybe a low buck truck. A BTR torque cam is good. Currently I have this cam in a truck, 220, 228 on a 4.8. Yeah, that's going to be really soft. Also have a 218, 226 on a 118. Both of those are going to be really soft. I wouldn't, neither one of those would I recommend. Our low buck truck camshaft is a 212, 218, or not 218, it's 212, 220 something. 212, 218 is the other one we're going to be selling. But it would be way better than both of those for probably for everything, but certainly for low speed power and boost response. And you just let the turbo do the work because you don't need camshafts in that motor. You don't need big camshafts in that motor to do what the turbo wants to do. What kind of car do you race? If you race, because I don't really know if you, but what kind of car do you have? The racing that I've done primarily, you can see back behind me. I have done lots of Bonneville stuff. I have lots of land speed records. Lots of road racing, lots of professional road racing. That's been more my stuff than drag racing. You thank God every day that you're an atheist. That's good. If choke horns were gone, would the gains be significant within the photo? Are you asking if we remove the choke horns from the carburetors, would we gain power on this combination? I would say 100% no, they wouldn't do anything. Because we have more carburation than we need for this power level. So they're not restricting the airflow. I do my best to keep Facebook out of the chats I moderate. Yeah, time for Undefeated Charger to go race Florida Highway Patrol's new C8. Is that what they have? They got one of those for Highway Patrol? I did suggest a smaller turbo. The 78mm Borg took forever to spool with the 306 small block. You should try one of our 42s. I totally agree with everybody having their own choice, religion or not. Yeah, live and let live. Yeah, all that's good. I actually like having, and sometimes this is not possible, but I like having like educated, analytical discussions with people about everything, about whatever thing that they want to have a discussion about with. I like having that sort of discussion. And I find that a lot of people can't have that because they don't have, I don't know, maybe the confidence to understand that hey, this is my thing and I like it and it's okay. And I'm okay with that. A lot of people are not. They get aggro and emotional and all of that stuff. You pick up infinite style HP with a well done unshrouding of a HOLLEY. You pick up style points. Mark my words, that will get cracked by some yahoo. I have run back in the day before they did these HP bodies. The carb shop used to mill the choke horns and all that stuff off and make stage 2 or 3 or 5 carburetors or whatever. And I guess they were supposed to flow better, but it's like having 2 dominators. So if we had 2 dominators, Well, do you really need to go bigger dominators? Probably not. Just a heads up, I'm a longshoreman in the LA Long Beach port, and we are seeing a slowdown in work. They told us to expect it to get worse. These tariffs are no joke. If you want car parts, get them now. Yeah, this is nonsense. How do you have any experience or practice with stock internal Hellcat engines in regards to redline? I mean, stock redline seems very low. Are there real reasons behind it? How much can it take? Yes, there are real reasons that there are factory red lines, because the OEMs have tested that and have done extensive testing, way more than anybody ever in the aftermarket, way more than all of the people in the aftermarket have done. They do extensive testing on durability. They run the motor for endless hours. They do all the things that are necessary to tell you that this motor will be able to warranty this motor within this, within this frame of engine speed and power output. When you go beyond that, it's not to say that they won't take that. They might, but when you do that, you now go outside of their tested window. So more than likely, and we see that in this stuff, that the short block is not a problem with RPM. Your first thing with RPM is going to be valve train. So you have to fix the valve train limitations for RPM. You can't take a stock motor and make it into an 8,500 RPM race motor just by adding camshaft and valve springs. They're not that, and they're not supposed to be that. You shouldn't expect them to be that, but they will run more than factory RPM. With your low buck truck cam, 5.3, 799, flex fuel, stock engine, would the flex fuel injectors be enough fuel and stock springs be okay? Yeah, those would be enough. I'm heading to go to sleep. We will see you. Did you do any tests on Demon carbs back in the day? Yeah, we did. We ran, Westech ran almost extensively Demon carburetors before they switched over to Holley. So for, I need to go look at the timing, but decades maybe. I heard they were just as good, if not better, than Holley 4150 double pumper. Yeah, an older double pumper is probably not a very high bar. The HP stuff in Holley is really good. The XP stuff is even better. The VRS Edelbrock stuff, probably the best stuff out there right now. But we made lots of power with Demon stuff. And Demon is owned by Holley now, so you're getting a Holley carburetor. Cam specs have grown so much. Remember when people were putting in 238, 242 in a stock LS1? Now mostly no one goes over a 231 or 233. What were we thinking? 238, 242 will fit in the stock LS1. 302 stock bottom end turbo. Any data on 24-pound injectors with 15 psi? If you're trying to run 15 pounds of boost, you're not going to do it with 24-pound injectors. You're going to run out of fuel very, very quickly. 24-pound injectors is enough for about 400 horsepower. And less than that under boost, because you're going to be running at 11 to 1. So I would not recommend that. Arkansas State Police going to be watch this, remove the 150 mile an hour limit from their cars. Does a Corvette have a 150 mile an hour speed limit? I can talk about anything with anybody as long as they understand I'm right. They made Dominators with chokes back in the day. I used a jigsaw and a Dremel to remove my last choke shroud. Okay. Lots of WD-40. So I ask you about injector size and PSI pump for Land Rover M112 supercharger stock play setup. Before I talked to you, I talked to my tuner and he said he thought 60-pound injectors would be fine. Yeah, it would be. It depends on the power level. So I don't know about the rest of the motor. I don't know what you're putting that supercharger on. So, but if you want, Gavin, if you want to know how much power injectors will support, multiply the injector flow rate. In this case, you have 60 pounds times 16. And then if you're running it under boost, multiply that number by 0.85. Yeah, that will support 800, a little over 800 horsepower. So my guess is you're not making that much with the 112. Hey, how do you flatten the torque curve? An NA engine, Ford 306 GT40 heads, intake, 70 millimeter throttle body, 222 cam. Why do you want to flatten it? Do you want to extend it out, or do you want to not make as much torque? The first thing that you would do in that combination is not run a long runner GT40 intake manifold on it. With a low buck truck cam, 64 millimeter turbo on a 4.8, which intake manifold should I use for low speed torque? Either one of those will work. A truck would be fine if that's what you have. Which either one of those you have will work with what you're doing. And if you haven't got your turbo yet, you should look at one of our GTX 3584 RS turbos for a 4.8. It'd be phenomenal on a 4.8. 276 wheel horsepower, 354 foot-pounds. Okay. Do you want it, George? Do you want it to make less torque or something? East Coast 93 octane, 5 psi on a stock, unopened 4.8. What are your thoughts on timing? I'm at 17 now, and NOx sensors aren't available. Good inlet air temps. Does it have? I don't run pump gas on stuff, so I don't know what the maximum amount you could get. I know Matt has done a lot of that stuff from Sloppy, and he's of the mind that you should run, like 14 pounds of boost and 14 degrees of timing is his thoughts. On 5 PSI, 17 is going to be safe on 93. You could probably get away with more timing, but what you should do is go with more boost, because the timing will get you in trouble more than the boost will. I hate to try porting an iron head with a Dremel. We'd need to go over Cam Ellis line of engines. Remember the Mustang Supercharger GT500 that had the ploy kit? The used car manager agreed to sell it out of state. The cost to make it smog legal is $5,200. It had over 900 wheel horsepower. Dragman, tell them I'll give them $1,500 for it. Talking about the old T-Rex cam or the Magic Stick. Yeah, I remember those. I remember those cams. I'm just surprised that fits. What kind of push rod technology do we not know about yet? What's your favorite style you like to run? I just run a push rod that is the proper length. I've done push rod testing of different lengths. I've done push rod testing of different wall thicknesses. I don't have a Spintron, so I can't do the kind of testing that I would really like to see, because I know that the really sharp guys in Cup, and Dan may have done some of this. He may have seen some of this, at least, that they were, I was told that they were altering the inner wall design of the push rod to have the thing, and this was way back, this was during the when they had qualifying motors, but they're trying to create loft from the push rod, and the frequency of the push rod's doing that, and they were doing that by designing the push rod, which is kind of cool. That sort of stuff is pretty exciting. Stock iron 5.3 gapped at 28. Low buck truck cam, 862 heads, 560 springs, L7 lifters, all that's good stuff. Used to break the choke horns off with a crescent wrench before milling off the rest. You definitely can do that. I've done that a lot with vice grips, and I like grabbing with vice grips and snapping stuff. That's it just makes you feel good. It's just, I wonder if GM will make an LT6 double over cam for the Camaro or trucks with a cross plane crank. That type of motor would make the Coyote fans a little quiet. I think that that's expensive for truck applications. Have you tested decap factory injectors? I have run factory or decap injectors way back in the 1999, 2000 range. A guy did those. Steve from Powertrain Dynamics did some. We used the decap injectors on that record-setting Civic that went 226. Those were decap injectors that we used, but to get 4 of them that worked for that Honda motor, we had to do 8 of them. And then you have to flow test them to make sure that they're the same. Because when you decap factory injectors, no matter which ones that you do, if you did 8 of them, they're not all going to come out the same. Richard, you do the same ring gap for top and second rings for boost? Yes, I do more. I do this. There's enough gap for both of them. I just do them the same. Maybe that's just lazy. You could do less on the top and more on the second, but if you talk to the ring guys, they want to reduce ring flutter by doing that. But I just put what I consider more than enough gap in both of them. I want to make more top end, so the long run GT40 intake is holding it back. Makes sense. I've been thinking about an Edelbrock RPM2. You will see more peak power with an RPM2. You will see more peak power with a HOLLEY Systemax. You will see more peak power with a box that you put on top of that GT40. You'll lose low speed power when you do any of those. But all of those change in runner length manifolds will definitely do that. You'll make more power if you take the GT40 assembly off of it and just put an RPM air gap carbureted manifold on it too. Richard, about push rod information, 120 wall, good for Windsor stroker, 8.2 deck stuff. I don't know how much the Windsor stroker doesn't, like wall thickness isn't necessary for a Windsor stroker. Wall thickness would be necessary for lots and lots of spring rate and lots of RPM. But I did a comparison on an LS, and this is at 7,500. We did 80 wall, and I think the other ones they sent were 105 of the same length, and we didn't see any change in power. That's more of a test that I would like to see on a Spintron to see if there is some deflection going on there that might not translate. You know, if you have 2 or 3 or 4 thousandths more, you know, loft or bounce or something, you might not see that in the power, but it would be interesting to see on a Spintron. Were you a fan of any of the Alphabet cams? I had an E cam in my something. It sounded good, but didn't make much power. It does make power. It makes a lot more power than any of the stock cams do. And I've run lots of those. And in fact, I'll bet you I was the first one to test all of those cams on the dyno way back. That's the day that we did 8 cams on the small block Ford. And that might not sound like a lot given what we've done on LS stuff, but the motor was run with full accessories because that's the way that we had to run it on the engine dyno. You know, and I think if I remember, it was also run with a factory EEC4 and harness that probably Mark Sanchez did. So it took a long time to swap all the cams. But we ran all of those, and I ran the 274 cam, and we ran the stock cam. We might have even run, way back then, we may have even tried like one of the truck cams or something. But we ran a B303, an E303, an F303, an X probably. What is a shroud metal? Some weird pot metal for the choke horn? Sold it for $6,350, 2014 GT500, 8-speed dual clutch automatic. It was fast, had E85 tune in it. That seems like a good price for that. Decap ejectors. Yeah, and you have to. I mean, that's a good way to go. That's why we did it. We didn't know anything about, you know, much bigger injectors. TrickFlow R manifold, one of the best around on a 5-liter. The TrickFlow R manifold was a terrible manifold. I never liked that manifold, and it never showed on any of the tests that I ever ran. It never showed any good power gains. all of the other trick flow ones were really good, and the box R was much better than the R upper manifold. They both use the same lower, but the box R was a good bit better than the R manifold. So I'm not a fan of that trick flow R manifold. Loft works on classes with limited lift. We would set the retainers to touch the guides and valve stem seals because of loft. That gap would then become the max lift. Yeah. Trick flow R with an AccuFab 75 race throttle body is a good setup. Yeah, like I said, I never saw anything make power with that manifold. The amount of stress and custom parts that need to be designed and tested, chasing a percentage of a horsepower for NASCAR motors would be very stressful. Yeah, or anything, not just NASCAR, but NASCAR is a good example, but also Pro Stock. I mean, the number of cams that people have tested for Pro Stock and head configurations and all kinds of stuff. Any reason to replace factory main and rod bolts since it appears rods are the stock bottom end and the weakness? No, we never did. We never changed any of those. I meant the box R. It was great for boost. Yeah, I mean, all the manifolds are good for boost. They just do whatever they did NA. But the box manifold was, in my opinion, was one of the better, if not the best, of those box style manifolds that people came out with. And it should be. It was the last one to come out that I know of. Still, it does lose power through some of the curve compared to the other stuff. Got one more minute. One more minute on our dual quad setup. I also want to mention before we leave the 50-pound injectors are on sale. We had them. They were $3.99. Now they're $3.59. So that's $40. You're saving $40. So that's good. And I think we're going to have more turbos in stock here fairly quickly. So, do you remember Swanson Performance? Yeah, I met Danny. Still wish Kazi made his P38s for small block forward, custom pistons, but when doing impressive build, the valve angles were sick. Yeah. Yeah, I like John. He's a good guy. He was big on tuning Fox bodies and Lightning trucks. Yep. Yeah, I remember the Swanson stuff. On that note, it is time to go. Again, thank you guys all for showing up, having our discussion about dual quad stuff. If you haven't, go take a look at the richardoldnerperformance.com. We got the 50-pound injectors on sale. We will have also the another cam up in another day or so, and then I'll do another live feed about that. And we'll see you guys all later.